बहुत सारी
क्या होता है? So Tarundi, I'll begin. I think formalities are complete, right?
Just a second. Start.
I think I'm seeing
Yes. Okay. Okay. I think I'll just start the recording also. So we can start. You can reclaim the poster.
Sure. Welcome each and every one of you on the second day of the course. I think we had a very fruitful session yesterday by Abhay Desai sir, and we have another prolific speaker, Arpit Haldia sir, who I think is now very popularly known in Calcutta. And we are seeing regularly information from him being circulated on so many different platforms, including WhatsApp, and he's also quite active on social media platforms. So we are seeing very good quality of information from him, because I see number of judgments which we have to otherwise study. We can also see in a snapshot from his books, from his updates that he keeps on sending. And he's written a book on search and seizure and GST. So we are very happy to have you, sir. And we also have Rohit, who's a very dynamic and young professional who's practicing in GST from Calcutta, who will be the moderator of the session today. He has just joined ACA recently, and he's with our fraternity now. Rohit, over to you.
Thank you so much,
start with the formalities. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So first of all, let me start with a very warm good evening to all of you. So let me introduce to one of the renowned speakers, CA Dr. Arpit Haldia, for today's event. Thank you so much, sir, for being on for today's event and accepting our request from Association of Corporate Advisors and Executive. So CA Arpit Haldia is chartered accountant, is cost accountant, company secretary. He has done his LLB and as well as PhD from J. Narayan Vyas University. He has a work experience of 21 years, and he is presently a senior partner in MS Arpit Haldia and Associates. He has authored 9 books on GST spreading across 28 editions. That is a very big thing which Mr. Arpit Haldia sir has done, which is like GST Made Easy, GST Mini Ready Record, GST Search and Seizure, GST Law and Practice, GST How to Handle ITC Litigation, GST Samasya Evam Samadhan, GST E-Way Bill, which has been published by the Taxman Publications. He has also written a handbook on composition scheme under GST English, published by the ICI. He has been a regular speaker since 2007 in seminars, conferences, and study circle meetings organized by various committees of ICI, branches of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He has been recently a national faculty of ICI for members of ICI. He has been a visiting faculty for NASIN for training of CGST officials and Public Financial Management and Training Institutes, Government of Rajasthan for training SGST officials. He has been training a lot of GST officials in Jodhpur and Jaipur as well. He has secured All India rank 36th for CA intermediate examination held in May 2000. Sir has done his PhD in comparative analysis study of existing system of sales tax and proposed systems of value tax, added tax. He is the office bearer in professional bodies, like he is the Secretary Tax Bar Association in Jodhpur 2009 and 11. He has been a secretary for Jodhpur branch of CIRC of ICI for term 2012-13, treasurer for Jodhpur branch in term 2011 and 12. He has been a SICASA chairman for Jodhpur branch. He has been a regular blogger on GST, and in last 7 years, he had written about 700 blog posts on GST, have a following 40,000 people on Twitter. So I would like to start the session with Sir, Dr. CA Dr. Arpit Haldia, sir, to hand it over the session to you. Thank you so much, sir. Please.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Rohit, for such a nice introduction. And thank you at the outset to the committee of ACAE, Arun Gupta ji and Shubham, for again giving me this opportunity to come on this platform. I believe this is my third session on this platform. Previously, I have taken 2 sessions on this platform, and it's always a pleasure to be amongst the members of ACE and the platform provided by ACE. So today I have been given the session on search and seizure in GST. Primarily, if we see the section, it is only one section, which is section 67, which speaks about inspection, search and seizure in GST. if I talk about search and seizure, more than the section, the legacy which is there from the decisions in the past, that how the search and seizure has to be handled, what are the rights of the assessee, the taxpayer, what are the rights of the department when they are coming for the action being initiated under section 67. That is also more important, along with the relevant provisions of CRPC, where by virtue of section 67 subsection 10, wherein they have been made applicable so far as may be applicable in GST. So starting with today's session, and as I do in almost all the sessions, that before moving on to the relevant section, the key terms, the key terminologies which has been used in this section and their implications on this section, I would like to discuss those terminologies first and then go on to section 61 and the related case laws. So when we go through section 67, you will find that there are terms which are saying that the officer should have a reason to believe, officer should be of the opinion, and officer should have suspected like this. These are some of the terms, and not only for section 67. If we go through various other sections like section 64 or section 62 or 63, therein these terms like the officer is satisfied, officer is of the opinion, officer has the reason to believe. What is the scope of these terms? See, whenever a power has been given to an officer, the four corners of this power is specified or limited through the use of these terms. So when a statute is using that the officer should have a reason to believe that this action has to be taken. So before taking on that action, there should be a reason to believe which should be documented. Because if that reason to believe itself is challenged and it is held illegal by the court, then all the subsequent proceeding would also be held to be illegal. So before, say we take an example of section 67, wherein Joint Commissioner, before authorizing any action under section 67 subsection 1 or 2, should have a reason to believe. So that means that reason should be on record. And supposedly the taxpayer challenges that reason itself, that the reason to believe was absent when the inspection or search or seizure action was initiated. And if the court holds that reason to believe was incorrect, then the entire action of the search or inspection would be held to be illegal. Now, if the statute uses, now supposedly section 67 also provide that the assessee has a right to take the copies of the document which have been seized by the department. So when he wants to exercise that right, he has to make an application. If the officer is of the opinion that providing copies of the document which have been seized would be prejudicial to the interest of the revenue, he may deny giving the copies of those documents. So what the term has been used in section 67, the officer should of the opinion that providing copies of the documents is prejudicial to the interest of the revenue. Now, in that case, that opinion has to be recorded has to be documented on the record and has to be provided to the assessee that why he is being denied the access to the documents. The assessee is well within his rights to challenge that the opinion which has been formed to deny the access to the documents is illegal. He can go to the High Court and challenge and then seek the remedy to get the copy of the documents. So whenever we are reading through the statutes, we have to be very apprehensive of these terms which have been used, because these terms contain the right which has been given to the assessee through in the statute through the use of these terms. And whenever these terms have been used, the officer is duty bound to follow the procedure which has been laid down in the statute. Now, if we go through another judgment of Honorable Apex Court in case of P.K. Chaudhary and others versus Union of India, wherein they have enunciated the meaning of reasons to be recorded in writing. Now, if we go through section 67, subsection 11, it provides that before seizing the document things, the reasons have to be recorded in writing. So Honorable Apex Court, while analyzing the scope of these terms, held that in such cases, mere recording of satisfaction as to the existence of the condition is not enough, but the reason which led to satisfaction must also be recorded. So not only the reasons have to be recorded, the reasons which led to satisfaction also has to be recorded. So the entire process, that why the conclusion was reached and what were the reasons behind that conclusion, that both of these things have to be recorded. Honorable Apex Court further went on to held that further the reasons recorded must be relevant and germane to the content and scope of the power conferred by the statute and must show a reasonable nexus between the facts considered and satisfaction reached. So whenever we are getting across to a term that reasons have to be recorded in writing, and it has been provided in the statute that reasons have to be recorded in writing by the officer, we are well within our right to seek a copy of the reasons which have been recorded. And once we get the copy of the reasons and we are not satisfied with those reasons, we are well within our right to challenge the reasons which have been recorded and challenge the very basis of those proceedings. So in a nutshell, if I can start this session, the first point which I would like to emphasize upon is that while we are reading through the statute and we come across the terms that the officer is satisfied, officer considers it necessary, officer deems it fit, officer is of the opinion, officer has a reason to believe, officer has to record the reasons in writing. You just have to feel that a right has been given to the taxpayer, and that right, if not exercised, would be an opportunity lost for the taxpayer. And reason to believe is different from reason to suspect. See, whenever a statute is using a term reason to believe, keep in mind that it is different from reason to suspect. And we are, since we are all professionals, we are well versed with the scope of the term belief and scope of the term suspect. Because when I am suspecting, I don't have a backing to that suspicion. I myself is not sure that whether I am right or wrong. But when I have a belief, there's an evidence, there's a backing behind that belief. And when I am having a reason to believe, that backing, that support should also be there, and that support should also be documented. Therefore, the lawmakers have not used the term reason to suspect. It is the term reason to believe, which has been used in section 67. Now, there are two terms. One is inspection and second is search. What is the difference between the term inspection and search? See, inspection is a softer term. If I speak in common language also, when I use the term inspection, that someone is coming and having an access to my place. And whenever I'm using the term search, it is having a much more gravity than the term inspection. And that's why two different terms have been used in the statute. So when section 67 subsection 1 uses the term inspection, the broad four corners of this term is to enable officers to have access to any place of business. But when the statute is using the term search, it means that it denotes an action of the government machinery to come, to look through and examine carefully of a place, area, person, object in order to find something which they suspect that it is there, but it is being concealed, or it is being concealed, or it is being hidden from the authorities to have access to. So the inspection is a softer term and search is much more severe term, much more stronger term which has been used in the statute. So now coming to section 67 subsection 1 and 67 subsection 2. Now this is a comparative analysis of section 67 1 and 2. And this comparative analysis would help us in analyzing the scope of these two terms. So when I go through section 67 subsection 1, it says where the proper officer not below the rank of joint commissioner. So who can exercise the power under 67(1)? A proper officer who is not below the rank of joint commissioner has a reason to believe. That means it is not merely a suspicion. He is having evidence for his belief that this action is necessitated to unearth some of the discrepancies which he has a reason to believe that exist with the assessee. So the first part of 67(1) has two important limbs. First, the proper officer should not be below the rank of joint commissioner, and that officer should have a reason to believe. What should be the reason to believe? It should be that a taxable person. 67(1)(a) uses the term taxable person. That means a proceeding under section 67(1)(a) can only be against a person who is registered or liable to be registered. It cannot be against an unregistered person. And there is a subtle difference when they are using the term taxable person, because in 67(1)(b) they have used the term person, and also in case of 67(2), taxable person has not been used. So there is an intentional use by the lawmakers of the term taxable person in 67(1)(a). Now, what the taxable person should have done for an inspection proceeding being undertaken under section 67(1)(a). Now, again, see the use of the terms. It says that a taxable person has suppressed any transaction relating to supply of goods or services of both. What is the term used? Suppressed. Now, again, emphasizing explanation 2 to section 74 explains the term suppressed. And an element of mens rea is inbuilt in the term suppressed. So the taxable person should have suppressed any transaction relating to supply of goods or services of both, or the stock of goods in hand. That means a transaction either has not been disclosed in the books of accounts or has not been made part of the books of accounts of a purchase or a sale, or has claimed ITC in excess of his entitlement under this act. He should have claimed an ITC which was in excess of his entitlement under the CGST Act or IGST Act, as the case may be, or has indulged in any contravention of any of the provisions of this Act. So far, so good. So broadly, there are 4 limbs to 67(1)(a): suppression of any transaction relating to supply of goods, suppression of any transaction relating to stock of goods in hand, claiming of ITC more than the entitlement, and indulgent in contravention to any of the provisions of this Act. For what? To evade tax under this Act. Suppression itself has an element of mens rea. So therefore, the transaction which has been suppressed relating to supply of goods or services or stock in goods in hand should have an element of mens rea. Secondly, if the ITC has been claimed in excess of entitlement or any contravention has been made of the provisions of this Act, that should also be made with an intent to evade tax under this Act. Why I am emphasizing on this term to evade tax under this Act? The question is that if we go through 67(1)(a), it means that there is a specific intention of the legislature that an inspection should only be carried out whenever there is an evasion of tax, whenever anything has been done out of these 4 things with an element of mens rea. So taking an example, supposedly I am charging a rate of 5% on particular supply of goods, and my officer believes, he has a reason to believe that the tax rate should be 12%. The question is, can an inspection proceeding be undertaken under section 67(1)(a)? See again, if I have reflected that transaction in my return, that it is taxable at the rate of 5%. It is not suppression. I have declared what was to the best of my understanding. It is not something for which I am going ahead with evasion of tax. It is purely an interpretational matter between me and the department. Let's take another example. One of my suppliers does not deposit his tax. So the department says that you have claimed a ITC in violation of section 16(2)(c). Now the question comes, can the department initiate a proceeding under section 67(1)(a) saying that the ITC has been claimed in excess of entitlement under this act? In my opinion, no, because this term that the taxable person has claimed ITC in excess of his entitlement is followed by the term evaded tax under this act. To evade tax under this act. When I am not hand in gloves with the supplier to claim ineligible ITC, I am a genuine supplier. So how can it be said that I have claimed excess ITC to evade tax under this act? And if that cannot be proved, how can an inspection proceeding be initiated against me? Take another example that the officer says that you have claimed a ITC in excess of the limitation provided under Rule 36(4). Again, this is something which is not in my hand because my supplier has not deposited the tax. It is not that I am handing gloves with him to not and saying to not to file the return. It is his duty to file the return. It is with this officer to force him to file the return. It is not my duty to ask him to file the return. So the entire emphasis while I am discussing section 67(1)(a) is that whenever an inspection proceeding is being undertaken against the assessee, the first thing which we need to see is whether it is at all falling within the scope of 67(1)(a). If it is not falling, supposedly someone comes to the premises of a client and say that the supplier to your assessee has not deposited tax. Therefore, you are not entitled to claim the ITC, and we have come under section 67(1)(a) to inspect the place of business. We are well within our right to challenge the proceedings at subsequent appellate forums that the inspection carried out under section 67(1)(a) was illegal, and that's why any further proceedings in pursuance of this inspection is also illegal. Now coming to section 67(1)(b). In 67(1)(b), they have used the term person. They have not used the term taxable person or registered person. They have used the term person. Therefore, whenever a power under 67(1)(b) is exercised, it can be exercised against any person, whether he is registered or liable to be registered or any person. What it says that the person should be engaged in business of transporting of goods. That is, he might be a transporter, or he might be a owner operator of a warehouse, godown, or any other place which is used for storing the goods. Now, in either of these two situations, that a person is a transporter or he is an owner operator of a warehouse or a godown or any place which is used for keeping goods, and the proper officer has a reason to believe that there are goods which have escaped the payment of tax, or accounts or records are being maintained by these persons which can cause evasion of tax payable under this act, then he can undertake an inspection under section 67(1)(b). Now, at what place this inspection can be carried out? In case of 67(1)(a), it can only be carried out at the place of business of the taxable person. So when I speak about place of business of a taxable person, what is the scope of the term place of business that has been defined under section 2, which says that a place wherein the supply of goods is made, from where the supply of goods is made, or at which the goods or services are being received, or where the books of accounts are being maintained. So whenever an inspection is being carried out in 67(1)(a) against a taxable person, it can only be at place of business. It cannot be at the residence of the proprietor or the director, unless until department is able to prove that the books of accounts are also being kept at their residence. See, each and every word in the statute has a meaning. Section 67 subsection 2 specifically use any place. So that means the lawmakers were well within their domain, have had all the knowledge that what is the specific term they are using. And that's why section 67(1) has only used place of business for a taxable person. So therefore, if the department is going to any other place, which is not a place of business of a taxable person, they are going beyond the scope of the statute. Secondly, in case of inspection is being carried out under section 67(1)(b), the inspection can be at any place of business of the person engaged in the business of transporting goods, or the owner or operator of warehouse or godown or any other place. So the place of business of a transporter can be inspected, or the warehouse or the godown or any other place where the goods are being kept by its owner or operator can also be inspected under section 67(1). So the key terms which are coming out of this section, whenever we are facing a proceeding under section 67(1) for a client, who has given the approval, whether there were sufficient reasons to believe, whether the proceeding of inspection is being carried out against a taxable person, if at all it is being carried out under section 67(1)(a), in which of the four limbs, in which of the four limbs the inspection is being carried out, whether there was a separation of a transaction in relation to supply of goods or services, or whether there was a separation of transaction in relation to stock of goods in hand, whether the taxable person has claimed ITC in excess of his entitlement, or whether he has indulged in any contravention of the provisions of this act. And for clause number 3 and 4, the excess entitlement or contravention should be with the should be for evasion of tax under the act. If the proceedings are being undertaken under 67(1)(b), they can be undertaken against a transporter or owner or operator of a warehouse, godown, or any other place which is being used for keeping goods. The inspection can only be at the place of business. It cannot be at a place which is not falling within the scope of place of business. So this is all about section 67 subsection 1. Now coming to section 67 subsection 2. Now this is speaking about search and seizure. So section 67 subsection 2 says where the proper officer, not below the rank of joint commissioner, so the authority remains of the same level both under 67(1) and 2, either pursuant to an inspection carried out under subsection 1 or otherwise. So a search under 67(2) can be in pursuance of an inspection carried out earlier against a person, or it can be direct otherwise as well. That means the process does not go, there are two options: either an inspection is first carried out and then it is converted into a search, or directly a search can be undertaken by the proper officer. So both the routes are available to the proper officer, that either he can convert the inspection to a search or directly undertake the search. that proper officer should have a reason to believe. Again, the same term, reason to believe. Again, the emphasis is that it is not a reason to suspect. It is a reason to believe, and the belief should be supported by an evidence. It should be supported by something which is having a force to prove something. Now, that reason to believe should be for, it can be either for a goods or document, books or things. So there are two categories under 67(2). First, it can be a good for which the search activity is being undertaken, or it can be for a document, books or things for which the search activity is being undertaken. So when the search activity is being undertaken for goods, those goods should be liable for confiscation. Keep in mind that the search activity can only be undertaken for those goods which are liable for confiscation. Therefore, the Joint Commission should have a reason to believe that there are goods which are liable for confiscation. Which are the goods which are liable to confiscation have been given under section 130 subsection 1 that we will be discussing separately. So the scope of the goods for which a search activity can be undertaken is those goods which are liable for confiscation. This is the first category for which a search activity can be undertaken. What is the second category? The second category is documents, books or things. Documents, books or things which are useful for or relevant to any proceedings under this act. So the reason to believe for a proper officer in relation to a document, books or things is that those document, books or things are useful or relevant for any proceedings. So when the reason to believe is being documented by the proper officer, he either has to say that he has a reason to believe that the search activity is for goods which are liable for confiscation, or the search activity is for documents, goods or things, documents, books or things which are useful or relevant for any proceedings under this act. Now coming to the next part. Yes, he forms a reason to believe that there are goods which are liable for confiscation, or there are documents, books or things which are useful or relevant for any proceedings. But merely this reason to believe would not be sufficient. He further should have a reason to believe that those goods, documents, books or things are secreted at any place. Now, this is a very important thing that 67(2) uses the term that those goods which are liable for confiscation, those books, documents, books or things which might be relevant or useful for any proceedings, they additionally should be secreted at any place. Now the question comes, what is the scope of the term secreted? Whether it means that they should be hidden, whether it means that they are being kept at a place which is not within the knowledge of the department, whether it means that they are being kept at any place which is other than the place of business. Because specifically this term secreted in any place has been used. Now, section 67 of CGST Act is parameteria to section 105 of Customs Act. All these terms which we are observing here in 67 are there under section 105 also. So all the jurisprudence which has developed over the period under section 105 in the Customs Act are all relevant under section 67. So when I go to the meaning of the term secreted, there is an Allahabad High Court judgment in GST regime, Rajiv Traders versus State of UP. Herein, they have explained the meaning of secreted separately for goods and separately for document, books or things. For goods which are liable for confiscation and have been secreted, Honorable Allahabad High Court has said, firstly, that when the section uses the term secreted at any place, that the term any place includes the place of business also. So the goods, books or things or documents might be treated as secreted even though they might be at the place of business which has been declared in the registration certificate. So now the question comes that if the goods, documents, books or things are kept at place of business, then how they can be treated as secreted even though they are being kept at the place of business which has been mentioned in the registration certificate? Because by default, as a taxable person, I believe that if I'm keeping something at my place of business and that place of business is recorded in my registration certificate, that means I have declared everything. How can be they treated as secreted even though they are being stored at my place of business? Honorable Allahabad High Court very categorically distinguished it and said that the goods which had to be entered in the books of accounts and were not entered in the books of accounts, even though they might be stored at the place of business, would be treated as secreted. In para 16 of the judgment, Honorable Allahabad High Court has said, then the only means and the method by which the assessing authority may subject any assessee to tax or make an assessment of his turnover is through examination of his books of accounts. So if the goods are not being entered in the books of accounts and even though they might be lying at the place of business, they would be treated as secreted. Now coming to the second part, how the document, books or things can be treated as secreted. Now in this case, Honorable Apex Court, in case of Durga Prasad etc. versus HR GOM Superintendent, Central Excise, explained the term secreted in relation to documents and things. And it said that, in other words, documents or things which a person is likely to keep out of the way or to put in a place where the officer of the law cannot find it. It is in this sense the word secreted must be understood as it is used in section 105 of the Customs Act. So if the proper officer not below the rank of the Joint Commissioner has a reason to believe that there are certain document, things or books which the assessee might not bring before him even though being specifically asked for, he has a reason to believe, then he might carry out a search activity against the assessee. Now in that case, the Government Council provided that some of the documents were recovered from the living apartments and safe of the petitioner and also from the drawers and tables and cabinets utilized by his sons, and a search was made for documents which may have been secreted in the premises. It many a times happen that the department has given a summon to a person that you are required to bring these documents before us. And in spite of several summons, the person does not bring those documents. In that case, the department might be well within their power to treat that the documents are being secreted at any place, because they know that the person is having the possession of those documents, but still he is trying to avoid bringing those documents. That means, that indicates that even though those documents might be in possession of the person at his place of business, but since there is a intentional effort by that person to not to produce those documents, they can carry out a search activity treating that they are being secreted from them. So that's how we have to understand the term secreted. So till now, what we have discussed under section 67(2), the proper officer should be a person, should be an officer who is not below the rank of Joint Commissioner. He can carry out a search either in pursuance of an inspection under section 67(1) or otherwise. For what reason he can carry out the search? He should have a reason to believe that there are goods which are liable for confiscation, or there are documents, books, or things which are useful or relevant to any proceedings. But those goods liable for confiscation, or those document books or things which are useful or relevant proceedings have been secreted at any place. So once he forms that belief that they are being secreted, he may authorize in writing any other officer of central tax, or may himself search and then seize such goods, documents, books, or things. See the flow in which the section has been drafted. Officer having a reason to believe for certain things which have been secreted, he might carry out the search either through an officer authorized by him or through himself, and then carry out the activity to seize those goods, documents, books, or things. Now, if we compare 67(1) to 67(2), in case of 67(1)(a), there was the use of the term to evade tax. There is no reference to any such term under 67(2). The only thing is that those goods liable for confiscation, or those books, documents, or things which are relevant or useful for proceedings under that, should have been secreted at any place. Whether it is for evasion, whether it is for any other purpose, it has no relevance under 67(2), because it does not use the term evasion or any other similar term. The only requirement is goods liable for confiscation, or document, books, or things useful or relevant for any proceedings under this act should have been secreted. And secondly, 67(1)(a) can only be carried out at place of business, but 67(2) can be carried out at any place. So for 67(1)(a), the department might be hard pressed to go to the residential premises of the proprietor or the director or partner. But in case of 67(2), they are well within their right if a reason to believe for the specified activity, and they believe that those things are lying there and have been secreted at that place. They are well within their power to have access to that premises. So this is 67(2). Now coming to the proviso, first proviso to 67(2). It says where it is not practicable to seize any such goods. The goods might be very heavy in their weight. They might be very long in the length. It might not be practicable for any such reason. The proper officer or any officer authorized by him may serve on the owner or custodian of the goods and order that he shall not remove or part or otherwise deal with such good except with the previous permission of such officer. Now, this is a prohibitory order, that you cannot remove or deal with those goods except with the permission of the officer. Now, for 67(2), if we go through the main provision in the first proviso, what it says that the proper officer may himself or he may authorize in writing to any officer of central tax. 67(2) also uses this term, authorize in writing any officer of central tax, and proviso to 67(2) also uses the term the proper officer or any officer authorized by him. Now there is a decision of if I can remember correctly, Honorable Gujarat High Court, wherein they have said that if an officer authorized by a proper officer is carrying out an activity of seizure or carrying out an activity of issuing a prohibitory order, he should specifically mention the details of the authorization through which he has been authorized. So whenever he is issuing either INS 02 or INS 03, the authorized officer should specifically mention on INS 02 or 03 that what was the document which gave him the authority to carry out a seizure activity under INS 02 or issue a prohibitory order under INS 03. Now coming to second proviso of section 67(2). It says, provided further that the documents or books or things so seized shall be retained by such officer only for so long as may be necessary for the examination and for any inquiry or proceeding under this act. So the documents, books or things can only be retained by the officer so long as they are relevant or so long as they are necessary for their examination or for any inquiry or proceeding under this act. When we go through this proviso, it seems like a harmless provision. That it only says that you have to keep this document, that an officer can only keep the document, books or things so long as he feels it necessary for the examination or inquiry or proceeding under this act. But when we go through section 67(3) and read it along with second proviso to section 67(2), that is a combined reading of second proviso to 67(2) and a provision of 67(3), we then come to understand the actual meaning of these provisions. 67(3) says the document, books or things referred to in subsection 2 or any other document, books or things produced by a taxable person or any other person which have not been relied upon for the issue of notice under this act or the rules made thereunder shall be returned to such person within a period of not exceeding 30 days from the date of issue of said notice. So any document, books or things which have not been relied upon for issue of notice should be returned within a period not exceeding 30 days from the date of issue of said notice. So when second proviso to section 67(2) says that the officer can retain it so long as they are relevant for examination, 67(3) provide that they have to be returned provided they are not relied upon while issuing the notice within 30 days from the date of issue of notice. So supposedly a search is carried out of an assessee, say in the month of May 2023. For the period April and May 2023. The financial year of April to May 2023 would be ending on March 2024. The last date to file annual return for March 2024 is December 2024. The last date to issue a notice under section 74 for 2023-24 would be June 2029. 4.5 years. So any document which has been seized from my premises relating to 2023-24 in May 2023 can be held by the officer up to not only June 2029, 30 days from June 2029, that is 30th of July 2029. Because an officer would only come to know that whether he has relied upon the document for issue of notice or not only when he has issued the notice. Prior to that, he will always say that this is my relied upon document which I would be using while issuing the notice. So once he issues the notice, supposedly issues the notice for 2023-24 on 29th of June 2029. Then he would say that these are documents on which I have not relied upon while issuing the notice. So the 30 days starts on 29 June 2029 and they end in July 2029. And this is not what I am saying. This is not my interpretation. This is the interpretation by Honorable Gujarat High Court. That a person, that an officer can hold the documents and has to return the documents only after the issue of notice, once he comes to know that he has not relied upon the documents for issue of notice, and he has to return them within 30 days from the date of issue of notice. Now this was about section 67.2 and 67.3. Now when section 67 subsection 2 uses the term goods liable to confiscation, the term goods liable to confiscation takes its meaning from section 130 subsection 1. Section 130 subsection 1 specifies 4 categories for goods liable for confiscation. The first is if the supply is made in contravention of the provisions of GST Act with an intent to evade payment of tax. Second, if goods are not accounted for on which tax is liable to be paid. Third, if goods liable to tax are supplied without having applied for registration. And fourth, contravention of any provisions of the Act or rules made thereunder with an intent to evade payment of tax. So only if these any of these 4 conditions is satisfied, then only they would be treated as goods liable for confiscation, and then only a search activity under section 67 subsection 2 can be carried out against a person at a place. Now coming to the second part of 67.2, that what is meant by the term books, things or documents. Now if we go through the term book, it has not been defined under the CGST Act. It has not been defined under the CGST Act, so we have to refer to the jurisprudence which has developed with relation to book. And this term book we also find under the Indian Evidence Act. So Honorable Nagpur High Court, in a decision which goes as back as 1914, said that in its ordinary sense, book signifies a collection of sheets of paper bound together in a manner which cannot be disturbed or altered except by tearing apart. The binding is of a kind which is not intended to be movable in the sense of being undone and put together again. So a binded book, binded papers can only be termed as book. A loose paper cannot be termed as book. So if a department comes for a search activity and they find 25 loose papers, they are not book because they are not bound together in a manner which can be took apart only by tearing it. They are loose paper, they would not be falling within the scope of the term book. So what would be falling within the scope of the term book? A diary would be falling within the scope of the term book. A spiral binded copy would be falling within the scope of the term book. So if loose papers are not falling within the term of the scope of book, those loose papers then would be falling within the scope of the term document. Now document has been defined under section 2 clause 41 of CGST Act to include written or printed record of any sort and electronic record as defined under IT Act 2000. So a written or a printed record falls within the ambit of a document. So a loose paper can be falling within the ambit of a document. Now a thing has not been defined. So anything which is not a book, anything which is not a document, then would be falling within the scope of the term thing. And that's why all these 3 terms have been used together. That any document, book or a thing which is useful or relevant for any proceeding under this act. So if I say that this is a book, binded papers, it will fall under book. If I say that these are not binded papers, these are loose papers, it would be falling under the scope document. If I say that this is neither a book, neither a document, then they will say it is falling within the ambit of thing. And that is what is happening with cash. See, whenever department goes for a search activity, what they have to prove? Either the goods are liable for confiscation, secreted at a place. Now cash is not a goods. Or they have to prove that there are documents, book, or a thing which is relevant or useful for any proceeding under this act. So they say that yes, cash is not a document, yes, cash is not a book, but it is a thing. Now then they take the benefit of section 67 subsection 3, wherein 67.3 says that document, books or things which are relied upon for the issue of notice can be held back by the department, and which have not been relied upon for issue of notice have to be returned back. So what the department says, that when we have issued a notice and we have said that there was an unaccounted cash of say 10 lakh rupees, and we have specified it in the notice, it becomes a thing which has been relied upon for issue of notice, because we would be treating those 10 lakh as supply made outside the books of accounts, and we have relied upon that thing for issue of notice. And this is what Honorable Madras High Court has said while approving the seizure of cash under section 67(2). Because when the department has issued a notice and they have specifically referred that a cash of say 9.31 lakhs was found from the place, and this amount has been referred in the notice and has been relied upon for treating certain supplies made outside the books of accounts, the cash becomes a thing which has been relied upon for issue of notice. Now the question comes that what is the difference a term document or a book makes? Why they referred books separately from a document? Yes, we can understand why they used thing, because it was something which was having a balancing impact. But why the term book has been used separately from a document? Why bounded papers are treated separately from loose papers, and loose papers are falling within the term document, and a binded papers are falling within the term book? See, it is all because of section 34 of Indian Evidence Act. Section 34 of Indian Evidence Act says entries in books of accounts when relevant. So when a department finds a diary wherein there is an opening balance, there are transactions, and there are closing balance which are being taken forward to next page, that diary becomes a books of accounts. And section 34 of Indian Evidence Act says entries in the books of accounts, including those maintained in electronic form, regularly kept in course of business, are relevant whenever they refer to a matter into which the court has to inquire, but such statement shall not alone be sufficient evidence to charge any person with liability. So a book which is kept in a binded form and found in the course of a search becomes an evidence. Although it might not be sufficient for becoming a sole evidence, but yes, it becomes a very important piece of evidence. But in case if it is a loose paper, the onus is upon the department to prove that the figures which have been mentioned in the loose paper pertains to a transaction which has taken place but which has not been recorded in the books of accounts. But when a book is found, the onus shifts on the assessee to prove that the figures which have been mentioned are not which pertains to the regular business activity. So by term book, we are interpreting a document which has been maintained in a manner wherein the opening balance, receipt, outward, closing balance, and then again the opening balance, a regular process is being followed. So therefore, the two terms have been used distinctively under section 67 to refer to a term book and to refer to a term document. And in case of this decision which we referred for arriving at the term book was famously referred by Honorable Apex Court in case of CBI versus BC Shukla, the Hawala Diary case which was there in 1990s. And in that case, certain torn papers from certain months, say October, March, and say February, were found. So the question came that whether they can be treated as a book or they are a loose document. Honorable Apex Court in that case said that these are merely torn papers of a diary which are not being bounded. So these are not books. These are loose documents, and these by itself cannot be treated as an evidence. So this is all about the scope of the term book, thing, and a document. And we have to be aware that how these terms goods, book, thing, and document have been used. Confiscation is only for goods. It is not for book, thing, or document. So the goods have to be liable for confiscation, and when they say that goods have to be liable for confiscation, the term meaning has to be taken from section 130 subsection 1, and the book, thing, or document has to be only for useful or relevant for any proceeding. Then they can be seized during the course of a search activity. Now coming to section 67 subsection 4, power to seal or break open. Now again, if we go through section 67(4), it says that the officer who has been authorized under subsection 2, who can authorize under section 67(2), a proper officer not below the rank of a joint commissioner can authorize an officer to carry out an activity of a search or seizure under section 67(2). That officer is also entitled to seal or break open the door of any premise, or to break open any almirah, electronic device, box, receptacle in which any goods, account, register, or documents of the person are suspected to be concealed. So when the statute is using suspected, that means again there has to be a suspicion formed by the officer authorized that he suspects that there are goods, account, registers, or documents which are concealed and where access to such premises, almirah, electronic devices, box, or receptacle is denied. Now the question comes that can the entire business premises can be sealed under section 67(4). The Honorable High Courts in various judgments have said that right to carry on business is a fundamental right of a person, and entire business premises can only be sealed in exceptional circumstances, and as soon as those exceptional circumstances are completed, the entire premises has to be allowed to be accessed by the taxpayer to carry on his business. So there was a case wherein the person did not provided the access to books of accounts. The department then sealed the entire premises and they kept it even after the access to books of accounts was provided, and it kept on for further 1 month. Honorable High Court then said that the entire premises cannot be sealed. Once the information has been received, then the access to premises has to be allowed. Now, there was another case wherein there was a warehouse wherein certain goods of a person were kept and they were not accounted for. So the department then sealed the entire warehouse. Honorable High Court then said that you can only seize the goods which are there, which are liable for confiscation, but you cannot deny the access to the entire premises merely because the goods have been stored in that place. 67(5). 67(5) allows a person to make copies of the documents or the books which have been seized from his custody in presence of the authorized officer. But if the proper officer is of the opinion that providing copies of those documents or books would prejudicially affect the investigation, then he can deny the copies of the documents. Now, if I go through section 67(5), interestingly, it uses both the term authorized officer and proper officer. If I read it verbatim, section 67 subsection 5, it says the person from whom custody any documents are seized under subsection 2, he shall be entitled to make copies thereof or take extract therefrom in the presence of an authorized officer, in whose presence the copies can be taken, in the presence of an authorized officer, at such place and time as such officer may indicate in this behalf. So the time and place has to be indicated by whom? The authorized officer. Which authorized officer? The officer which has been authorized under section 67(2). Except where making such copies or taking such extracts may, in the opinion of the proper officer, is prejudicial to the investigation being carried out. So who would be forming opinion that copies are not to be provided? It is the proper officer who has to form the opinion. It is not the authorized officer who has to form the opinion that the copies of the documents is to be denied. So the copies have to be provided in presence of the authorized officer. The time and place also has to be decided by the proper officer, by the authorized officer. But if the denial has to be made, then the opinion has to be formed by the proper officer, but not the authorized officer. So supposedly say there is a joint commissioner, he authorizes the superintendent to carry out a search activity. That superintendent seizes some document and the assessee goes to the superintendent, he wants a copy of the documents. Now, if the copy of the document has to be denied, it cannot be denied by the superintendent. The opinion then has to be again formed by the joint commissioner that whether the copies have to be denied. If the copies have to be denied, then a written communication has to be made to the assessee that this is the reason by which or for which you are not being allowed the copies of the document seized. So section 67 subsection 5 is about making copies of the document seized or denying the access to the copy of the documents. Now this is all about rule 139. The meaning of the term secreted we have already discussed. Meaning of the term reason to believe we have discussed at the start. Now there are two cases which I would like to discuss before moving ahead. Both of these two cases are in the GST regime, wherein in one case reason to believe was held to be good, and in second case the reason to believe was held to be invalid. Now in case of Rimjim Ispat Limited versus State of UP, Honorable Allahabad High Court said that the reason to believe to initiate search were based upon information received by department fortified by interception of goods of applicant company wherein e-way bill was found to be suspicious. Writ petition as regard insufficiency of material for carrying out search and seizure failed. So the department had an information that the assessee is purchasing goods without a proper e-way bill. This was only an information, a reason to suspect. How they converted it to reason to believe? They checked a vehicle which was moving pertaining to that party And when they verified the e-way bill, it was a deficient e-way bill. It was not containing. It was not containing all the information which was required to be there on the e-way bill. Therefore, that reason to suspect became reason to believe. That reason to suspect became reason to believe. And when the assessee challenged that reason to believe, the court held that it was a correct reason to believe. Now, in another case, before Honorable Delhi High Court, what happened was, and see, it is a very interesting case, that there was a one trader, RJ Traders. Or take an example, there was one trader which was indulged in fake or bogus billing. He supplied certain goods to a person. The Joint Commissioner who was carrying out the departmental activity against the trader informed a superintendent or an inspector to carry out an activity under section 67 to verify that whether the recipient existed or not. So for what the search activity was carried out under section 67(2) to verify whether the purchasing dealer existed or not. Now, when this reason for which the search activity was carried out was challenged before Honorable Delhi High Court, they said that merely to verify that whether the purchasing dealer was existence or not is not something which is falling within the scope of section 67 subsection 2. 67(2) allows a search activity only wherein the goods are liable for confiscation or any document, book or a thing is secreted and it is relevant for any proceeding or useful for any proceeding under the Act. But merely to verify the existence of a dealer, a search activity under section 67(2) can never be carried out. So therefore, the search activity carried out against the taxpayer was held to be invalid. So this is how honorable courts have been analyzing the scope of the term reason to believe and for what action under section 67(2) can be undertaken. For what reason an action under section 67(2) can be undertaken. Now another thing, when this reason to believe has to be checked, whether it has to be checked before a search activity is undertaken or it can be verified after the completion of the search activity. Honorable courts in various decisions have held that a reason to believe has to be checked at the time of commencement of a search or at the time of giving an approval to carry out a search activity. It can never be checked or verified after the completion of the search. So supposedly, when the search was carried out, when the search was started, the reason to believe which was recorded was not proper. But once the search was completed, department came into possession of certain evidences which further substantiated their reason to believe. Now the question is, the reason to believe was not substantiated at the time of commencement of search, but was only substantiated after the end of the search. Can that search be held to be a valid search? In such case, the search activity which is substantiated only after the completion of search has held to be an invalid activity. because the reason to believe has to be seen when the activity of search was started, not when it was completed. So we have to be, the department has to be skeptical while they are recording the reason to believe, while they are arriving at a reason to believe that it should be sufficient enough at the time of commencement of the search. It cannot be substantiated by the evidences which have been gathered during the course of search activity, and any further proceeding which is undertaken subsequent to this search, invalid search, would also be held to be an invalid proceeding. Now, coming to some general issues which are arising out of section 67.1 and 67.2. Some of them we have discussed, and if not discussed, then we would be taking them. Can cash be seized under proceedings under section 67.2 of CGST Act? We have already discussed, and now there are three decisions. Two decisions favoring that cash can be seized. One is for Madhya Pradesh High Court, and second is for Madras High Court. The another one which is contradictory to the two decisions is coming from Delhi High Court, the recent decision in case of Arvind Goel CA versus Union of India, wherein they have said that cash cannot be seized since this is not a thing which is relevant or useful for proceedings under the GST. Second, can inspection be done at premises of an unregistered person? This we have already discussed, that then inspection can only be carried out at a place of business of a taxable person. In case of a section 67.1a, so a taxable person is a person who is a registered person or liable to be registered person. If a person who is neither registered person nor a liable to be registered person, then an inspection can only be carried out in case of a 67.1b if he is a transporter or engaged in a business of a warehouse, godown, or any place wherein the goods are stored. So if he is a transporter or a owner or a operator of a warehouse or a godown, yes, inspection can be carried out even though he is not a registered person or not liable to be registered. But if inspection is being carried out under section 61(1)(a), he has to be either a registered person or a person liable to be registered. Can inspection proceedings be conducted for failure to file returns? Now, this is one interesting case that supposedly I am a registered person. I have not filed return for say 3 months. I have not filed returns for 3 months. Can department carry out an inspection against me under section 67(1)(a) for suppression of supplies made? In my opinion, suppression, which has been defined under explanation 2 to section 74, it says failure to disclose an information required to be disclosed in a return, document, or a register maintained under the Act or any other Act. So if I have not filed a return for a reasonable period or say 3 months, it cannot be treated as a suppression. Yes, if I have not filed a return for a say a period of 2 to 3 years, there might be a case to treat it as a suppression for carrying out an inspection under section 67(1)(a). But merely non-filing of returns for 3 months cannot be treated as a suppression, and in my opinion, inspection activity cannot be carried out for this failure to file returns. Can difference in tax rate be reason for conduct of inspection proceedings? In my opinion, no, because if I have disclosed such supplies, which in my opinion were taxable at the rate of 5% and might be taxable at the rate of 12% in the opinion of department, it is not a suppression. I have disclosed. It is my interpretation that they are taxable at the rate of 5%. And difference in interpretation can never be treated as suppression, because whatever was required to be disclosed, it has been disclosed as per my understanding in the correct column which has been provided in the return. Can failure to follow Rule 36(4) be a reason for inspection proceedings? Again, in my opinion, no, because it is not something for which I am claiming credit in excess of entitlement, in excess of my entitlement. with the intent of or for something to evade tax. I am not hand in glove with the supplier. I am a genuine recipient. If the supplier is not filing return, it is his own whims, it is his own understanding, it is his own failure to file the return. So again, in my opinion, for failure to file return, for claiming a credit beyond the provisions of Rule 36(4) cannot be a case for carrying out an inspection activity under Section 67(1)(a). Can such proceedings be conducted only at place of witness? Again, it can be carried out at any place. 67(1)(a) speaks about place of witness, but 67(2) does not speak about place of witness. It says secreted at any place, which includes place of witness and place other than the place of witness where the officer has a reason to believe that the goods, books, things or documents might be secreted. Now the next question, whether presence of advocate is allowed. Again, Honorable Madhya Pradesh High Court has said that provisions of Section 67 do not require presence of an advocate at time of such proceeding, and thus assessee's request for same could not be allowed. Can proper officer deny giving copies of the document seized during the course of search proceedings? There are two decisions in GST regime on this aspect. In one case, wherein the copy was denied, High Court directed the officer to provide the copies of the document seized. In another case, in case of Agrawal Oil Mill versus State of Madhya Pradesh, Honorable Madhya Pradesh High Court accepted the stand of the department that the opinion on the basis of which they have denied the access to copies of the documents is a valid opinion, and therefore the assessee was held not to be entitled to be given the copies of the documents seized during the search activity. Again, everything boils down to the reason on the basis of which either the reason to believe has been framed or the opinion has been framed. If the opinion is backed by sufficient evidence or sufficient reasoning, then the High Court would also not be interfering in such case. Can an authorized officer issue an INS 03? Yes, he can issue, but Honorable Andhra Pradesh High Court has said that if an authorized officer is issuing INS 03, he has to mention the document, the details of the document by which he was authorized to issue INS 03 or INS 02. Can GST authorities visit premises of a partner? 67(1)(a), pretty difficult because 67(1)(a) speaks about place of business. 67(2), yes, provided they have a reason to believe that goods liable to confiscation or document, books or things which are relevant or useful for any proceeding under this act have been secreted at the residential premises of the partner. Can stock verification be carried out based upon the admission by the proprietor and without physical verification? So supposedly a department is going to a premises and there is a huge stock lying, and the department asks the proprietor that what is the value of the stock. The proprietor says the value of the stock is 10 crore rupees. The department says that as per your books of accounts, it is coming 9 crore rupees. So whether you admit the difference of 1 crore, the assessee admits 1 crore rupees. Now subsequently, the assessee retracts from his admission. Or what we can say, he challenges the manner in which the stock was undertaken. Can the mere admission by the proprietor that the value of the goods lying in his premises is 10 crore without physical verification being carried out be sufficient for creation of demand against the assessee? In my opinion, no. And that is what has been held by many courts, that weighment or counting is sine qua non for goods not accounted for. And as per Article 265, a levy of tax cannot be without the authority of the law. And mere admission without there being a counting physical verification would not be sufficient. Yes, in some extreme cases wherein the entire process of verification was not challenged in a proper manner, in that case courts have favored the department, but in rest of the many cases the courts have favored the assessee. And in my opinion, whenever I am challenging the process by which the value of the goods was ascertained, I am not retracting from my statement. I am only challenging the merits on the basis of which the entire process was carried out. It is a challenge to the fact-based thing. It is not a challenge to what was it is not a challenge on the basis that it is not a challenge on the basis of which the department was duty bound to accept my admission only. My admission cannot be the sole reason for arriving at the difference in the value of goods in the books and value of the goods in the premises. That difference has to be identified and ascertained only on the basis of proper stock verification. Whether loose sheet constitutes an evidence for creating demand against the assessee. In one of the case, Honorable Apex Court said that the loose sheets are hearsay evidence. And hearsay evidence has no validity under the Indian Evidence Act. That loose document has to be substantiated by the department along with certain other evidences which prove that those loose documents pertains to a transaction which took place and which has not been made part of the books of accounts. So a department, when it comes to a premises of the assessee and gather certain loose sheets, those gathering of the loose sheet is not sufficient by itself to hold that certain transactions were entered without being made part of books of accounts. The onus is on the department to prove that those loose sheets depicts those transactions. It is not upon the assessee to prove that these does not reflect to any transaction being taken place. It is upon the department, because loose sheets by themselves are not evidence. They are only hearsay evidence. What is the time limit for retention of document, books or things seized in the course of search? That we have already discussed in that the documents, books or things which have not been relied upon have to be returned within 30 days from the date of issue of notice. However, in case of goods which are liable for confiscation, they have to be released if the notice is not issued within 6 months from the date of search. This is coming from section 67 subsection 7, which we will be discussing subsequently. So there are different timelines for return of the documents or for the return of the goods which are liable for confiscation and have been seized. In case of return of the goods which were seized, treating them for liable for confiscation, they have to be returned back if the notice is not issued within 6 months from the date of the seizure. In case of a documents, books or a things, there are two categories. One, relied upon. Second, not relied upon. The documents, books or things which are not relied upon have to be returned within 30 days from the date of issue of notice. The documents, books or things, there is no specific time limit given. Only guidance which has been given is under second proviso to section 67(2), wherein they said that they can be held till the time the proper officer feels it satisfactory to be relevant for the proceedings or examination. Can taxpayer be forced to reverse ITC during the course of such proceedings? Now there is an instruction. There are many decisions. Some of the decisions have been quoted by me as well, that taxpayer cannot be forced to reverse ITC during the course of such proceeding. However, if the department is able to prove that the reversal was made voluntarily without any force being put on the assessee, that reversal cannot be challenged subsequently. In one of the cases, Honorable High Courts have upheld the contents of the department that the assessee voluntarily reversed the ITC, and it was not something which was forced upon him, and that reversal was held to be valid. Now coming to other subsections of section 67. Section 67 subsection 6 speaks about release of goods. Now in such case, there are two types of release. One is a provisional basis, wherein the goods are released upon execution of a bond or furnishing of a security in such manner and of such quantum respectively as we prescribe, which is coming from Rule 140, or on payment of applicable tax, interest and penalty as the case may be. In my opinion, when tax, interest and penalty are being paid, it is not a provisional release, it is a final release of the goods. In case of section 67 subsection 7, it says that if no notice is given within 6 months on the date of seizure of the goods shall be returned back to the person from whose possession they were seized, and this period of 6 months can be extended by the proper officer on sufficient reason being given. In case of a material which are of hazardous nature or which depreciate very quickly with the passage of time, or which have a constraint of storage space or any other relevant consideration, and which have been notified by the central government through relevant notification, they might be disposed of by the proper officer in such manner as may prescribe. The manner has been given under Rule 141, wherein first option is to be given to the owner to either deposit amount which is equivalent to the tax, interest, penalty, or the value of good, whichever is lower. And if the person fails to do so, then the proper officer or the appropriate officer can move ahead and dispose of those goods so that their value is kept intact in terms of the money. Section 67 subsection 11. Now again, this section 67 subsection 11 speaks about seizure of the documents, accounts, registers. Now if we compare section 67.2 to section 67.11, there is a difference. Section 67 subsection 2 provided that documents, books or things which are relevant for any proceeding or useful for any proceeding under the Act and which have been secreted at any place, they can be seized by the officer. But in case of 67.11, the powers are much wider. It says where the proper officer has reason to believe that any person has evaded or is attempting to evade payment of any tax. So what is the precondition for 67.11? The proper officer should have a reason to believe that there is an evasion of tax or there might be an attempt to evade tax. Such proper officer for any reasons to be recorded in writing. Now, in case of a 67.2, there was only a reason to believe. In case of section 67.11, those reasons to believe are additionally required to be recorded in writing by the statute itself. 67.2 does not mandate that they have to be recorded. They have to be put on record, but they are not to be recorded. That has not been specifically provided. Although as per best practices, they should be recorded in writing, but in 67.2 it has not been specifically provided. But in 67.11 it has been specifically provided that those reasons to believe had to be recorded in writing. That a seizure of the accounts, register or document of such person produced before him are required, and a receipt of such seizure has to be given to the person. So what happens in case of a 67.11? Supposedly a summon is given to a person to appear before him and produce certain documents. The person appears before the officer and produces the accounts, registers or document which were whatever were required through the summon. Now, when those documents are produced, the proper officer has a reason to believe or gathers a reason to believe that the person who is sitting before him has either evaded the tax or would be making an attempt to evade tax. And the documents which have been produced before him are necessitated to be seized. He may, for reason to be recorded in writing, seize those accounts, register, documents which are produced before him. And he shall retain the same for so long as may be necessary in connection with any proceeding under this Act or the rules made thereunder for prosecution. So, what is the time for which he can retain them? He can retain them for so long as he considers is necessary in connection with any proceedings or the rules made thereunder for prosecution. So if we go through again section 67(3), wherein a time limit was given for 30 days from the date of issue of notice for the document which have not been relied upon. No such time limit has been given under section 67(11). So 67(11) is a power which has been given to a proper officer in cases wherein 67(2) is not applicable. Now coming to section 67(12), this gives a power to a commissioner or an officer authorized by him to purchase any goods or services from a taxable person, to check whether there is an issue of tax invoice or a bill of supply by such taxable person. So any goods or services can be made to be purchased by a commissioner or an officer authorized by him to verify that whether a particular person is issuing an invoice or a bill of supply at the time of supplying of those goods or services. Once that is checked, then the provision provides that if the goods are returned, such taxable person or person in charge of business premise shall refund the amount so paid for the goods after cancelling the tax invoice or bill of supply issued earlier. So a person authorized by the commissioner goes to a shop, purchases the goods, the bill is issued to him, he verifies them that the bill is being issued, he then returns back the goods to the supplier, the bill is cancelled and the amount is refunded back to the person who was authorized to purchase those goods. But this entire process of cancelling the invoice, refunding the amount is only in case of goods, not in case of purchase of service. So if a purchase of any service is made, then the invoice issued for that supply of service cannot be cancelled and the amount cannot be refunded back to the department. Now coming to section 67, subsection 10, applicability of provision of Code of Criminal Procedure. Now section 67(10) incorporates the provisions of Code of Criminal Procedure relating to search and seizure. As far as may be. The most important term is so far as may be or as far as may be. To the search and seizure being carried out under the CGST Act or the GST Act. Subject to the modification that when section 165 subsection 5 of CRPC uses the term magistrate, it has to be substituted with the term commissioner. So all the provisions of search and seizure provided under Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 would suitably or as far as may be applicable to search and seizure being carried out under GST Act. So what is the scope of the term as far as may be? That is to the best extent possible. That is, if there is any contradiction between the two provisions, then the provision in GST Act would prevail. It would not be a case that the provision in Code of Criminal Procedure would prevail over the provisions of GST Act. So when the term as far as may be has been used, so therefore when the process has been provided that reason to believe has to be made by a person, a proper officer not below the rank of Joint Commissioner, the provision in GST would prevail. But if there are certain provisions which are provided under Code of Criminal Procedure and no such provision has been provided under the GST Act, then the provisions of Code of Criminal Procedure would be incorporated or would have to be followed while carrying out the search under the GST Act. So section 165 subsection 4 of Code of Criminal Procedure provides that the provision of this code as to search warrants and general provision as to searches contained in section 100 shall so far as may be applied to a search made under this section. So by virtue of section 165(4) and section 67(10), provisions of section 100 of Code of Criminal Procedure are also applicable to search being carried out under the GST Act. Section 165 subsection 5 of Code of Criminal Procedure provides copies of any record made under subsection 1 or subsection 3 shall forthwith be sent to the nearest magistrate. Now this magistrate term would be replaced by commissioner, empowered to take cognizance of the offence, and the owner or occupier of the place search shall an application be furnished free of cost with a copy of the same be provided by the commissioner. Now 165(5) provides two issues, specifies two things. One, the copies of the records made under the search being carried out has to be forwarded to the commissioner. Since there is no specific provision under the GST Act, so therefore, whenever a search is being conducted and it is completed, all the records and the copies are provided to the proper officer who had authorized the search. Secondly, 165(5) provides that whatever document which have been seized have to be provided free of cost, and a copy of the same has to be provided to the person from whose premises they were seized. In this case, there is a specific provision under section 67, subsection 5, which provides that a proper officer, on making an opinion that providing copies of the document would be prejudicial to the interest of the revenue, can deny the access to the copies of the document, books, or things seized. So when there is a specific section under section 67(5), this provision of 165(5), which invariably mandates to provide a copy of the document, would not sustain, and 67(5) would override 165(5). Now coming to section 100 of Code of Criminal Procedure, the entire process that how the search is to be carried out in presence of two witnesses, the search party making them available before commencing any search to be searched, that has been provided in 100 subsection 1. The females being searched only by females, strictly following the provision, strictly following the decency, is there provided under 100 subsection 3 of Code of Criminal Procedure. Two witnesses being present, independent witnesses of a respectable cadre being present during the entire search, is coming from section 100 of Code of Criminal Procedure. So all these provisions, which are also not provided under section 67, but have been provided under section 100 of Code of Criminal Procedure, are part by virtue of section 67 subsection 10 of the CGST Act. Now there is an instruction number 1/2020-21 dated 2/2021, which provides the entire manner in which the search should be carried out. The only one thing which I would like to highlight, rest of the things we have discussed at some point of time during this entire 2 hours, is the Panchnama. Now, Panchnama is one of the most important documents, and it is nothing but the entire sequence of events which took place right from the starting of the search to the end of the search. It has to be recorded in the Panchnama. And if the Panchnama itself is challenged, that it has not been properly drafted, the entire search activity would also be subject to challenge. The copy of the Panchnama has to be given to the person who was subjected to the search. It is his right to get the copy of the Panchnama, and the Panchnama must be signed by 2 independent and impartial witnesses, which are called as Panch, and also by authorized signatory of the concerned party whose proceedings are being convened along with the officers who came for the search. Now, sometimes the question is raised, what happens if the 2 independent or impartial witnesses are not present? It is a clear violation of Section 100 of Code of Criminal Procedure, which has been incorporated to Section 67, subsection 10 of the CGST Act, and non-compliance of that 2 independent witness provision would make the entire search illegal and beyond the provisions of the statute. Now, concluding the today's session, looking to the limitation of the time, one specific thing which I would like to highlight, and which is in distinction to the Customs Act, because in the starting, as we discussed, that Section 67 of CGST Act is parametric to Section 105 of the Customs Act. Now, there is Section 136 of the Customs Act, which says that if any officer of customs requires any person to be searched for goods liable to confiscation or any document relating to without having a reason to believe, or he arrests any person without having a reason to believe, or he searches and authorizes any other officer of customs to search any place without having reason to believe, he shall be punishable with the imprisonment of the term which may extend to 6 months, of which fine which may extend to 1,000 rupees, of which both. So if any improper activity under Section 105, which is parametric to Section 167, if any improper activity in Section 105 of Customs Act is done, the proper officer is liable for punishment with imprisonment. But there is no similar provision in GST, which is similar to Section 136 of the Customs Act. On the contrary, Section 157 in CGST Act provides protection of action taken under this Act to the officers in which they carry on an activity in accordance or to carry out the provisions of this Act. So it would have been great if the provisions similar to Section 136 of Customs Act would have found its place in GST. Then any activity of search and seizure which takes place under Section 67 subsection 2 would have been carried out in a more responsible manner and a more appropriate manner. With this, I would like to conclude my today's session. And although the topic is very wide and I myself could not complete some of the slides which I had prepared, but I would be sharing this presentation with the organizers. And if there is any query, I would be happy to take the queries. Handing you back to you, Rohit.
Thank you so much, sir, for enlightening us for the topic of search and seizure in such a depth way. So I would like to take up some questions from the audience. So first question I would like to take from the Mr. Naveen Kumar Chandhandaria, sir. So Naveen, sir, you can put your question forward.
I have 2 queries on seizure of digital evidences. I am seeing 2 cases of Panchnama where they haven't generated the hash character and they haven't done the chain of custody for the digital evidence. They simply wrote down the serial number. I have a doubt here under Indian Evidence Act, till the hash characters and other things are not done by the searching party, whether it will have any evidential value in the court of law.
To be very frank, I am not aware of the hash character which you are, because it's a very technical thing which I have not come across till now. But what I can say is that if any digital or if we go through the definition of document which has been given in this under the CGST Act section 2+41, it includes electronic records which are there under the IT Act, and what they have defined is electronic records as defined under the IT Act. So what they have imported is a definition of the IT Act under the CGST Act. So if any evidence which is not preserved or prepared as per the method given under the IT Act 2000, then in my opinion it would not be a valid evidence. Yes, if it is prepared in accordance with the guidelines laid down under the IT Act, it would be a valid evidence. If it is not so, then it would not be treated as an evidence.
That is my viewpoint also. But now if the demand is raised on the basis of such electronic devices, pen drive which has not been generated, I think the demand will not sustain in court of law.
So it would not be an evidence. And if
Yes.
it is not an evidence, it cannot be used against me. The onus is upon the department to prove and use it against me.
Yeah, and second query is on the cash. I have a different viewpoint on this because the money itself has been kept out of the GST regime, and if there is a cash, first and foremost is cash, because they have not designated any bank account as it was in erstwhile excise law or custom law. Second, they have no strong room concept in GST if they are seizing the cash. And second, there is also a circular which says that during search and seizure, you cannot ask for the payment of tax, whether seizing of cash will amount to payment of tax or not.
Well, I am also of the opinion which you are having, because when I go through section 67(2), I am only allowed to search and seize documents, books, or things which are relevant or useful for the proceedings under the Act. The cash cannot be a thing which is useful for the proceeding or useful for the proceeding under the Act. So in my opinion, if we go through 67(2), see, I would be going to a proviso to 67(2) or a 67(3) only when 67(2) is applicable. If 67(2) itself is not applicable, then 67(3) or a proviso, second proviso to 67(2) would also not be having any impact. And that's why Honorable Delhi High Court has said that cash cannot be seized during the course of a search under section 67(2). But since GST is an evolving law, and we are here to discuss the law, there are contrary decisions of two high courts as well. So therefore, I brought it before the audience that there are two judgments who have distinguished the judgment of Delhi High Court.
Yeah, that's the point. There is no clarity. I have been with the departmental officers also. They are also not clear on this, whether cash can be seized or not.
In my opinion, sir, I will stick to that cash cannot be seized because it is not a thing which is relevant for the proceedings under this Act.
Yeah, that is my viewpoint also. But they are now seizing the cash.
That is why we are reaching to the High Courts day in, day out.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you to organize for allowing me.
Thank you, Mr. Naveen Kumar Chandra, sir. So, would like to ask one question which was put up by CS Kaushik Nahar sir in starting of the event only. Whether books of accounts cannot be confiscated if there was no power of search. See,
6711 is there.
Yes, sir.
We have discussed 6711. So it
Okay.
specifically says that if they are produced before the proper officer and he has reason to believe that tax is being evaded or there would be an attempt to evade tax, he can seize the books of accounts.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So one question was Mr. Prashanjali Tripathi ji, who has asked whether under section 6711, who can be the proper officer?
See, 67(2) speaks about proper officer not below the rank of a joint commissioner. Now, in this case, a proper officer by virtue of circular which has been issued in July 2017, read with 9th February 2018, any person who has been authorized by the board would be the proper officer. It can be a jurisdictional officer, it can be an division officer. Any person who has been vested with the power under this section would be a proper officer.
Okay, thank you, sir. So
it does not provide that it has to be a person who is higher than the rank of, or at least of the rank of a joint commissioner, as is the case of 67(2). So that's why I said that 67(11) has having a very much wider power.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So I would have few words from Mr. Shubham Khaitan sir for this event, today's event. So over to you, Shubham sir.
Thank you so much, Rohit. And I think we'll all agree that this has been a very fruitful session for all of us. I'm sure there has been a lot of value additions in terms of a lot of CRPC references, IPC references. We've seen so many different laws getting covered here when we see search and seizure. As Sir has basically taken each and every small part of Section 67 when it comes to a phrase like secreted, what is reason to believe, all these things, right? In any place, whether the goods are stored, what is the meaning of any place? Would it cover disclosed place of business or undisclosed as well? So I think this has been a session which allows us to stay intrigued, to know where to read. I think, which Sir emphasized in the beginning, at least we should know where to start from, which I think a lot of us would now have a great deal of idea about. And I'm sure with the PPT that Sir is having, when we see the PPT, we'll also have a great deal of information in what Sir was wanting to share with us. So Sir's PPT is very comprehensive. And what he has done today has been truly amazing for all of us in terms of knowledge dissemination, because we all have been really enriched by the amount of information that Sir has shared with us. And this is not something that we hear on a regular basis in GST, because this is something which is information which only comes in through a lot of experience and an in-depth reading which Sir has done, and he has been very kind enough to share all of that with us. So Arpit ji, thank you so much for sparing your time and giving us this valuable information and your time. Thank you so much for being here with us. Rohit, can you share the screen which contains the memento that we want to present to Sir from the side of ACA?
Yes. So my screen is visible. So this is a memento from Association of Corporate Advisor and Executives for you, sir, for enlightening us for all the knowledge for search and seizure cases. And thank you
Rohit,
so much.
I think your screen is not visible completely, so your e-memento is not coming in properly. So if you could see.
Just a second. Is it visible now?
Do you have a dual screen?
Yeah, I have a dual screen.
So I think you can duplicate your screen once probably and just open the e-memento. Actually, it's not coming in the screen. It will come. It's coming. The other screen is visible.
Just a second. Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shubham, for
Thank
giving
you
me
so
this opportunity, and it always always a pleasure to be amongst the members of ACE and along with you, and to the members of ACE, I share a special bond with Shubham, because the composition guide which I wrote, Shubham was the approver for that composition guide.
And I should say that there wasn't much to change in that. The kind of writing which was there, on that day itself, I'd heard your name for the first time, and I was really impressed with the writing that you had, sir. And I've been reading about you and reading your articles and your books ever since then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot to everyone for giving us a very patient hearing.
Thank you. Arupji is also there.
Yeah.
Arunji is also there. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
thanks for
you.
coming, Arunji. Wonderful session it was.
Thank you, Arunji.
Thank you, Arup-ji. And we really thank you for supporting us always. Thank you.
Thank
With this, I think we'd like to end the session here.
Yes.
Thank you to everyone.